Since Chinese President Xi Jinping's first visit to Russia in 2013, Sino-Russian relation appears to have grown increasingly closer. Prior to the outbreak of the war in Ukraine, both Xi Jinping and Putin had publicly asserted a friendship without boundaries. Nevertheless, divergence and competition over key issues between the two nations cannot be overlooked. For instance, China's expansion strategy in Central Asia indisputably poses a challenge to Russia's geopolitical standing. Conversely, Russia remains somewhat reticent towards China's penetration of its economic market. Although Western nations have shown explicit stance on the Ukraine issue, even offering military aid, China has not provided Russia with conspicuous military support. This implies that when it comes to their respective core interests, Sino-Russian relations might not be as harmonious as they appear on the surface. John Kirby, the coordinator of strategic communications at the White House National Security Council, has pointed out the primary driving force behind Xi and Putin's quest for a closer relationship is in fact to counteract the United States and the West. This approach seems more a tactical maneuver rather than a carefully contemplated long-term strategy. Kirby's statement suggests that even if common anti-American interests temporarily bind China and Russia closely together, the relationship could quickly become tense and uneasy once their individual core interests come into play. China's stance on the war in Ukraine is a clear example. As the greatest beneficiary of the global trade system, China's priority is to prevent economic decoupling with the United States, its largest trading partner, driven by its own economic interests. Wally Adamo, the Deputy Secretary of the U.S. Treasury, warned, if China provides military aid to Russia, the United States is prepared to impose sanctions on Chinese companies or financial institutions. In light of this scenario, China understands that it is indeed falling into the Thucydides trap with the U.S., but also recognizes that there is still a long way to go before a breaking point. Therefore, China is deliberately biding its time, keeping its stance on military aid to Asia ambiguous, and not taking a hardline stance against the United States. As for Europe, needless to say, it is a target that China is trying its best to win over. For Russia, this war is a matter of national destiny. Victory could break the American strategic encirclement since the Soviet Union, while failure could lead to national disintegration again. Russia hopes to receive military aid from the Chinese Communist Party. In September last year, Putin publicly expressed at the Eastern Economic Forum his hope that China would help Russia build the port of Vladivostok, the exchange of China's military aid. But China's response was cautious. As of May this year, the General Administration of Customs of China only formally agreed to ship goods domestically through the port of Vladivostok. The caution is not only due to concerns about potential sanctions on China's economy by the West, but also because of the possibility of Russia leaning towards the West. As war continues, it is evident that despite the long-drawn conflict in Ukraine, Russia has refrained from launching a substantial attack on the United States. NATO's military aid and battlefield advisors have not elicited a direct backlash from Russia. Furthermore, when Europe seized its purchase of Russian energy, Moscow failed to deploy effective countermeasures. The underlying rationale is Russia's reluctance to burn all bridges with the West, maintaining instead a line of communication for potential future reapproachment. The goal of Russia's conflict strategy is to detach Europe from the influence of the United States, not to sever all ties with America. China, seeing this delicate balance, naturally exhibit hesitation in supplying military aid to Russia. The ongoing developments in the Russo-Ukrainian conflict attest to this. Last year, following Russia's seizure of northern Donbass, the conflict entered a period of de-escalation in July. However, this lull is arguably influenced by the rising tension in the Sino-American standoff over Taiwan last summer. Putin's gambit involves stoking a confrontation between China and the US in East Asia while simultaneously cooling down the Russo-Ukrainian front. The Kremlin theory is that, as long as the US is not completely antagonized, a Sino-American conflict might see Europe and the US attempt to draw Russia away from China, or even induce Russia to thwart China's plans. Beijing anticipates a bolder stance from Moscow, expecting it to definitively sever relations with the US. Only when Russia finds itself concerned with no alternative will China re-evaluate its support, potentially agreeing to a geopolitical exchange of interest. Indeed, after Putin's meeting with Xi Jinping in September last year, the former acknowledged China's doubts and concerns about the Ukraine conflict. This dichotomy explains China's public assertion of limitless Sino-Russian cooperation while subtly advocating for a self-determined resolution to the Russo-Ukrainian conflict, thereby sidestepping the need for direct involvement. On the economic front, the Chinese Communist Party is hesitant about forging deeper ties with Russia, given its comparatively diminutive economy. As per 2022 data, Chinese exports to Russia constitute a mere 2% of China's total export volume, hence contributing minimally to China's export trade. Although currently there are restrictions on importing Western high-tech products and automotive component into Russia, Chinese private enterprises are actually reluctant to penetrate the Russian market. This reluctance is rooted in concerns about product quality, Russian economic conditions, and the investment environment. Consequently, Sino-Russian economic and trade exchanges are predominantly spearheaded by state-owned enterprises contributing only minimally to the solution of China's current high unemployment rate. In the grand scheme of things, China is reassessing its interdependence with Russia in Central Asia. While Russia remains a key energy supplier to China, the latter is actively exploring alternatives to bolster its energy security. At the recent Central Asia 5 summit, China proposed the construction of the D-Line Central Asian natural gas pipeline to reduce its reliance on the Siberia No. 2 pipeline. This is not China's inaugural energy pipeline project with Central Asia countries. Kazakhstan and China have co-constructed the first oil pipeline in Central Asia, and Turkmenistan and China have completed 3 natural gas pipelines. According to insiders, the decision in question is not driven solely by fiscal deliberation, but also speaks to China's strategic geopolitical shifts. The Siberia No. 2 gas pipeline, seen from China's perspective, must go through Mongolia, a country closely associated with the United States, thus necessitating hefty investments in the infrastructure. Furthermore, China's leadership, spearheaded by Xi Jinping, does not want to hinge the nation's energy security entirely on Russia. Notably, during its Kremlin visit in March, Xi made no explicit reference to the Siberia No. 2 project, and the Russian Prime Minister Mishustin was unable to secure a concrete commitment on the project during his recent visit to China. Given the impending European sanction on Russia, coupled with the escalating cost of warfare, this has exacerbated the divergence in energy interests between China and Russia, creating an even more urgent demand for the project. In a parallel development, China is reassessing its stance and strategy concerning the China-Europe rail route. Predominantly, there are 2 lines in Central Asia. The northern line passes through Kazakhstan, connects to Russia, and then heads south from Moscow, ultimately reaching Hamburg in Germany. Despite the detour, this route does not offer Russia the advantage of transit fees. The southern route of the Central Asia Railway, by contrast, is packed with potential. 2 branches lead to the Persian Gulf and Europe, respectively, enticing a substantial amount of international capital into Central Asia. This influx could indeed undercut Russia's influence in Central Asia, a factor that has made Russia resist the construction of the China-Kyrgyzstan-Uzbekistan railway segment, although the country's opposition seems to have softened of late. These developments have caused unease in Russia while also signifying that China on the geopolitical and economic front is leaning more towards direct engagement with Europe instead of using Russia as a go-between. China's inclination towards stronger ties with Central Asian nations means that without significant capital investment, the deepening of Sino-Russian economic cooperation would hit a snag. Even if economic cooperation does intensify, the potential risk posed to China due to overly intimate economic ties should not be underestimated. If mishandled, the West could perceive China as supporting Russia's encroachment on Ukraine, leading to possible economic sanctions against China. Last year, Sino-Russian trade reached an unprecedented high of $190.271 billion, Nevertheless, China's trade deficit with Russia continues to grow. While the total value of goods China exported to Russia hit $76.122 billion, the value of goods imported from Russia was significantly higher at $114.149 billion. This trend of a widening deficit has been in place since 2021. When China's trade deficit with Russia reached $1.68 billion, a first in 3 decades, during Q1 of this year, this trade deficit continued to grow. China's trade with Russia increased by 38.7% year-on-year, amounting to $53.846 billion, with exports worth $24.074 billion and imports worth $29.772 billion, leading to a deficit of $5.698 billion, a sharp increase from the $2.837 billion deficit to the same period last year. These risks are not solely confined to the economic domain. In geopolitical terms, China often refrains from lending unequivocal support to Russia on critical issues. For instance, following the 2008 Russia-Georgia conflict, Beijing denied recognizing the independence of Abkhazia and South Ossetia. Furthermore, during Russia's annexation of Crimea in 2014, China abstained from the UN's condemnatory resolution instead of opposing it. Similarly, Russia maintains cordial ties with Southeast Asia and has not visibly leaned towards China on the South China Sea issue. Insights from within the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, SCO, suggest a nuanced landscape of interest between China and Russia. Russia's aspiration to institute a collective security mechanism via the SCO meets with restrained skepticism from China, largely stemming from apprehensions about potential disruptions to its beneficial trade ties with the United States. This chess-like diplomacy is further evident in Russia's inclusion of India, perceived as a rival by China, into the SCO. In response, China invited Pakistan, a notable adversary of India, to join the consortium. In the arena of military collaboration, although Russia has sold the sophisticated S-400 anti-aircraft missile defense system to China, it has also armed India, China's competitor, with identical weaponry. Furthermore, Russia exhibits considerable discretion when it comes to sharing sensitive military and technological secrets with China. This was highlighted when an initial deal for Russia to procure data storage and service from China's telecommunication giant Huawei was unexpectedly abandoned, a clear demonstration of Russia's caution towards the adoption of Chinese technology. The conundrum of whether a Sino-Russian relationship qualifies as an alliance is indeed complex. Some commentators argue that despite their intimate military cooperation, neither Beijing nor Moscow are exhibiting urgency to formalize an alliance. A bona fide alliance, after all, implies shared risks and responsibilities. As the NATO framework illustrates, if an attack befalls one member, all others are duty-bound to respond. Yet, the Sino-Russian dynamic hasn't evolved to this level of commitment. For instance, China refrained from offering explicit military support to Russia during the Ukraine conflict. Conversely, both Russia and China appear to be exerting efforts to peacefully amplify their respective regional influences while simultaneously wrestling with domestic issues and challenges. This has suppressed their ability to put in place influence strategies on a global scale. As a result, the United States, the other major player in the global arena, continues to express confidence in its capacity to confront China in the Indo-Pacific and Russia in Europe independently. In summary, the Sino-Russian relationship presents one of the most intricate and idiosyncratic diplomatic relations in the world today, characterized by an ambivalent fusion of rivalry and collaboration. While the nations share considerable depth of cooperation across numerous domains, the relationship stops short of evolving into a full-fledged alliance. Although the relationship currently remains cooperative, dramatic alterations and even tense standoffs could transpire should disagreements over core interests emerge.